Trauma Therapist Podcast Plus listeners can listen to episodes early and ad-free right now. Become a Plus listener by going to Apple Podcasts, searching for the Trauma Therapist Podcast, and signing up today. All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to help trauma therapists be their incredible selves, to be human, to be real, not just a clinician. I'm a big believer in who we are is more important than what we know. And this requires cultivating authenticity, genuineness, and vulnerability, and that requires intention. You can learn more about my courses and workshops by going to thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. Let's get started. Okay, so 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. Very excited to have as my guest today, Claudia Goetzelmann. Claudia, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So Claudia was called to become a compassionate inquiry facilitator and offers an abiding safe presence, deep listening, and curiosity as gifts for others. Her work is held in the containers and modalities of compassionate inquiry, IFS and Focusing, end of life, among others. She says that these are her strengths when supporting healing because healing happens in relationship with one another and specifically with the self and body. Claudia, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So before we get going, share with our listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
Actually, originally Germany, and I am also in Germany right now. I'm in Berlin.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I know we're going to talk about certain things, but I want to ask you to start kind of the question I ask everyone to start. How did all of this start for you? How did you get here?
How did I get here? Yeah. So 8 years ago, I went through a death, my own death, my divorce. And I'm a very curious person. So next thing I knew, I became an end-of-life doula because I was so curious around the topic of death. And that's how it all started.
Okay. That's the summary. That's the cliff notes. So the divorce. Okay. So divorce, end of life, doula, one doesn't automatically draw a straight line to that.
Well, I felt something was dying in me through the life I believed in, which was no longer. And I really fell into myself. I broke apart. And I got really curious what was dying. And then there was no language around death. There was, it's such a big taboo. So because I'm very curious, so I wanted to learn, so became an end-of-life doula. And then I realized that I do not actually want to work at the end on the bedside at the very end, but there is so much wisdom which we can bring to this part of our life right into the middle. And if we could share that, embody that, live that, then we, could shape our lives in a
and this is very interesting. And it's almost hard for me not to share that I recently went through a divorce too. And I can really relate to what you're saying. But I'm curious, did this divorce, were you surprised by this divorce? Was it something that was mutual and you knew that this thing was dying, or was it suddenly thrust upon you?
Good question. Maybe there was a coming towards, there was a path, but maybe I didn't want to necessarily face that, or I was hopeful that it wouldn't be terminal. And then at the end it was. So that became, divorce is a life shattering. We put so much energy into this. Yeah. It's something future, right? Oriented. We build together and then it's gone.
So what happened for you? You started getting really curious about finality, about things that are dying. So what did you do?
What do you mean? What did I
Well, did
do
you
in
did
this?
you did you say to yourself, all right, I got to find out what the hell is going on here. I need to learn more about things that are dying, and so that got you interested in becoming a doula. What happened?
Yeah, I just really was curious around the process of death. And, there's the big death, our final death. We're born to die, but then we actually get to practice death all day, every day. There's so many deaths. I mean, COVID really showed us. There was like suddenly we couldn't go to the restaurants anymore. We couldn't meet our friends. So many things we take for granted. And if we give ourselves, or if we can practice dying and we get comfortable, then it's not necessarily so difficult because we already know that something comes to an end. Endings, it's actually, maybe we can call it endings.
Mm-hmm.
Because how are we with endings? Many people cannot be with endings. I mean, my praxis when I work with people, when my client relationship ends, for instance, how are clients often? They say, "Oh, can I keep calling you? Can I keep texting you?" Because they can't really end. So that also is like so interesting and fascinating. It says so much about our inner landscape.
So, how do you work with people in this context? I mean, so is this what
In
you do? People come to you in what capacity, in what state, and they say, "Claudia, help me."
um, kind of. It varies from very much in despair. I have been in a major anxiety, depression for months on end. I have numbed myself. I have addiction, maybe even suicidal, or it's also couldn't be, wow, my kids are now out of the house and I don't know what to do. I am empty nester. I mean, it's all depends.
Mm-hmm. And
Yeah.
so, walk us through how you would work with someone with this topic of endings. How does that come up?
Mm. How does that come up? So each session, I mean, there's an intake form, and in the intake form, people will share a little bit about themselves, and then each session has an intention, and usually it's anchored in a real life situation. Something, let's say you have an issue with your work colleague and you feel really upset, and maybe it's that far that you need to you want to quit the job but you can't. So we find out what's holding you back. What
Mm-hmm.
is it? Why are you not leaving? What is it what comes up? I mean, it goes back as to often to the childhood, to beliefs, patterns.
Does this understanding or I think courageousness, right? It takes a certain amount of courage, I think, to look at death, certainly, and endings.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what has that given you? Your ability to do that. Because when you first started this,
Mm-hmm.
were you like, no friggin' way, I don't want to look at death. What was your attitude towards it initially?
Wow, good question. I think I really was curious because I wanted to understand the process which was internally and externally happening. And I wanted to orient myself. Needed to ground within that knowledge. I
Mm-hmm.
needed to understand what it means to let go. Because every ending is also a new beginning. So, in order to newly begin, I needed to make peace with this ending.
I think for a lot of us, and me specifically, sometimes that's a hard pill to swallow. Every ending is a new beginning because when you're in the ending, and someone says, you know, when I let people know that I had experienced a divorce, because for me it was like out of the blue. I didn't expect it,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of people in wanting to help me, they said, well, I know it's tough, but it, it'll be the best thing that's happened to you. I didn't want to hear that. I'm not
No.
ready to hear that in that moment.
No, I mean, you're also grieving. That's the thing. You
Exactly.
wanted to be acknowledged. You wanted to be just actually held in your pain, witnessed in that what was going on with you.
Right. That's
Yeah.
exactly right.
But isn't that also what we do when we accompany somebody when the person is dying? We're holding them. We're being a sacred witness. We are actually celebrating um, their life. We're walking next to them. We're ritualizing that space of this shift
Mm-hmm.
from form to formless. Or in a divorce, suddenly this new space is opening up. A dream is collapsing. So we're being witness to, and by making it sacred, this ending can, take on a new form.
How did this change your work? So prior to this interest or an exploration in endings, were you working with clients in a different capacity?
Before,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, before I started this new path, I was a photographer,
Okay.
and as a photographer, I always needed to make connection with people. Like, because I want to take a picture, let's say, of you, I need to form a connection very quickly.
Right.
So we had to build a trusting relationship or a trusting exchange. So I love people. Maybe this gift was always present. It just
Mm-hmm.
shifted into something much, much deeper.
And so after the divorce, then you started working with clients in a sense as a therapist or a facilitator?
No, I mean,
No.
no, I still did photography for a while, but then I went and did all these studies in the background until now I'm only doing client work.
Okay. So my question
Mm-hmm.
is, how did this interest in endings shift your relationships with people when you work with people? What changed? What shifted for you in your work?
Presence, to be more
Presence.
present. Yeah, to be more present, to being actually give people more presence, to really um, lean into the ordinary moments, to really listen to people, what they share, to, yeah, because everything is ending, everything is just here right now, and then it's gone.
What do you feel
To
that does for your clients? Give me an example. I want you to give me an example if you can get specific about what that looks like.
I think it informed also safety. For me, safety is like one of the most sacred things aside from presence. If you feel safe with me because I am your witness, I'm witnessing you without judgment. I'm just here, even if we sit in silence. You're able that whatever is present in you can come up,
Mm-hmm.
and you can start processing, because there's no judgment. There is just this spaciousness. And we need to be witnessed, even if we sit in silence.
Yeah, that's so true. It's funny you said that because I was thinking this morning that I wanted to or needed to talk to one of my friends who doesn't judge me. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you can tell them anything. And that's such a powerful thing to have. You can just say whatever to that person. They're not going to judge you. They're just going to
Yeah.
hear. I mean, that's so
No
amazing.
fixing.
Right.
Yeah, no
No
fixing,
fixing.
no fixing, no suggestion. You don't have to do anything. You just be you.
Was that always your orientation?
Mm-hmm.
It was.
Yeah. I think I needed to needed to do that with photography as well. Maybe with photography, there's a little bit more directions.
Yeah.
I had an agenda. I guess I needed to take a photo of the person or whatever the situation was. But now I couldn't even let go of that.
Mm.
And to me, that's the most humbling process in all of this work. When somebody comes to me and maybe shares for the first time ever something which they have been carrying around their entire life. And that in itself is so healing.
You know, on this podcast, we often talk about how difficult and challenging that can be. Because I love what you're saying. And a lot of people listening, I think, do as well. But it's not always easy for people to do. Just to sit and to create that safety. We talk about safety. We talk about vulnerability and presence and all these buzzwords. But these elements, these modes of being, they can be very challenging for a lot of us to cultivate.
Yeah, especially, in our society where we're constantly doing, we're not being, where we're afraid of our stillness because of the voices coming up, because we're strangers to our emotions. Yeah. So when I start working with somebody, I do ask how it is when we connect to the body. And even that in itself is a very difficult thing. Often to connect to the body is not a safe space. So we can orient. I do a grounding, short grounding, and we can orient in the room, just holding on to something. It's this from the bottom up approach that maybe we just notice our feet, we notice the toes touching the ground, and that could just be the little bit what helps to establish that first safety.
In the bio I read, there's mention of IFS and other different modalities. How do you incorporate those? There's so many different modalities out there, right? What do you find important? What speaks to you, and how do they speak to you? For instance, IFS. Talk to us a little about how you integrate that.
So when I work with people which maybe tend to go into the head because they need to justify the thoughts, or there's logic thinking, like the reckoning, if I do the justification. A lot of us live in our heads, right? We don't live in our bodies, we live in our head. So often that is a good approach to bring parts work in. Because
what would that look like, for example? Give us an example of how you might have worked like that with the client.
Well, maybe I ask the person to go into the body, and then whoosh, a part comes in, a numbing part, and next thing we know, the logic, all the reckoning, all the thoughts, all the words are happening up here. So then I could say, well, what's happening? And we slowly access what's happening in the mind. And usually then there's a voice where usually we are very familiar with the critic and the protector, just to start with, and then that's a good way to sort of start breaking down this internal family we're carrying and befriending and getting to know why there is a voice. We often live with these voices our entire life, and we've never actually made contact. Even so, these voices talk to us every day, 24/7.
And just to be clear, you're talking about the kind of normal chatter, normal voices we kind of all experience. We're not talking about, dissociative identity disorder and so forth.
No,
not necessarily.
That would be a very complex example to give you. I want to keep it very simple, but right. It starts with the inner critic. Right. What's the function of the inner critic? We're all familiar with the inner critic, but we don't usually have a relationship. Usually we hate this part when it comes up. But if we get to know this part might be our survival mechanism, our coping mechanism, which saved that little person way back when. And now it's this huge roadblock right now. It inhibits us to live authentically. But we need to get in touch with it. If we're curious, if we want to, we choose to. But then it's sort of, we get to know it, we can have a conversation. Maybe it becomes more silent. Maybe it wants a different job. Maybe, so many options, right? What could happen? And then through that, we become more whole again.
So, Claudia, you have an obvious passion for this. This work, what we're talking about here, is obviously You can feel it. And what keeps you going in this? What excites you about this work?
I find it enormously humbling when somebody comes and trusts me that much and shares something, as I said earlier, never shared before. And through that can leave after the session and feel lighter and more connected to self. I think that's it. It's very simple, but it really nourishes me. I find it very beautiful because we live in a world we're so disconnected, where we don't really give presence to another. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I feel this is the first time that somebody really listened to that person I'm working with. They really, for the first time, have eyes and ears and be like, wow, I see you. And that's so touching.
There are obviously a lot of therapists of all different kinds listening to this, survivors. What would you say to someone who wants to develop this presence that you're talking about, this beingness that you're talking about?
A lot of self-work, because I also truly believe I can only meet my clients as much as I can meet myself. So I need to understand, who am I when whoever shares something with me? Am I triggered? Am I going into story? Am I losing that person? Or am I really still present? Can I internally take 3 short breaths and come back to you? I think that's, that's the thing. We really need to know who we are. Mm-hmm. And that's endless work. I mean, it's continuing, like it's not done. It's always, again, fresh and fresh and fresh. We get to get curious around ourselves.
All right, Claudia, look, I feel like I can talk to you forever. How do people get in contact with you? What's the best way?
Yeah, Instagram.
Okay.
My handle, permission_to bloom, and my website also permissiontobloom.org.
Okay. And we'll have that linked up here at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. Claudia, look, you are welcome back anytime. I'd love to bring you back on the podcast. You just have this amazing presence and energy, and I love it. Thank you. Seriously, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Take care.
Bye.